Sacred sacrifice. A global history of religious martyrdom. Introduction. The meaning of martyrdom. The story of religious martyrdom is as old as the story of religion itself, stretching across countless lands, cultures, and centuries. The word martyr is derived from the Greek term martis, meaning witness. Indeed, a martyr is someone who bears witness with his or her life, often tragically until death, to the truth of a religious conviction. When a believer faces persecution, they stand at a crossroads, recant and survive, or persist in their faith and face punishment. For many, the sincerity of their belief has led them to accept death rather than renounce their convictions. Martyrdom transcends the boundaries of a single tradition. People have died for their beliefs in Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, Sikhism, the Bahá'í faith, indigenous faiths, and countless other religious expressions across the globe. These men and women come from all walks of life: kings, peasants, monastics, warriors, teachers, tradesmen, and homemakers. While the specific beliefs for which they died vary significantly, they share the common thread of unwavering commitment to their faith. Martyrdom often occurs during times of upheaval, political transitions, imperial conquests, colonial expansions, or social and cultural revolutions. Rulers or regimes may see certain religious traditions as a threat to unity or authority. New or minority faiths may be persecuted by the majority, or long-standing traditions may be subjected to oppression by invaders. In each instance, those who choose to stand firm and refuse to abandon their faith have become potent symbols of resistance for future generations. Historically, the memory of martyrs has shaped religious communities. Martyrs' stories are retold in sermons, epic narratives, liturgies, songs, and festivals. Shrines are often built around their remains. Relics of these believers become sites of pilgrimage. Over time, these narratives forge communal identity, reminding adherents of the cost of loyalty to the faith. In some places, the commemoration of martyred heroes has even guided the socio-political development of entire societies. Yet martyrdom can also be contentious. Within any given religious tradition, interpretations about what constitutes genuine martyrdom can vary. Some see the willingness to die for faith as the highest calling, while others question the intention or context. In Islam, for instance, the Quran and Hadith speak of martyrdom in the context of defending one's faith, family, or community. However, debates have arisen about whether certain types of self-sacrifice qualify as legitimate martyrdom. Similarly, in Christianity, an early consensus recognized men and women put to death during official Roman persecutions as martyrs, but subsequent centuries introduced new questions about violence, armed resistance, and forced conversions. In short, the concept of martyrdom is neither monolithic nor universally defined. Even so, the powerful image of a believer who gives up life rather than renounce his or her most cherished religious truths resonates deeply. Throughout this narrative, we will encounter a diverse array of stories, some that took place in the glare of public arenas, some that occurred in remote villages or hidden corners of the world. We will see how some individuals accepted martyrdom as an act of peaceful resistance, while others were swept away in conflicts beyond their control. As we embark on this journey through time, we will begin with the ancient roots, looking at how the idea of martyrdom developed in the ancient Near East and through the stories of the Maccabean revolt in Jewish history. We'll then proceed through the formative eras of Christianity under Roman persecution, the evolution of Islamic notions of martyrdom during the early centuries of the caliphates, the crises and persecutions faced by Jewish communities across medieval Europe, the defining moments of Sikh martyrdom in South Asia, the poignant stories of Bahá'í and Bahá'í martyrs in Persia, and much more. Our exploration will illuminate how the act of dying for one's faith is not only a matter of historical record, but also a shaping force in the collective psyche of religions worldwide. By the end, we'll have surveyed a landscape that includes towering monuments, neglected gravesites, large-scale pogroms, and intimate testimonies. And through each story, the moral and spiritual courage of individuals, ordinary and extraordinary, shines through. Chapter 1. Ancient Roots. Early examples of martyrdom. 2.1 Martyrdom in the ancient Near East. Long before the rise of monotheistic faiths like Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, ancient civilizations in Mesopotamia, Egypt, and the Levant had their share of religious conflicts and sacrifices. While the modern concept of martyrdom did not yet exist in these societies, certain individuals faced execution or severe punishment because they refused to abandon personal religious commitments or disobeyed the dictates of a local priesthood. In ancient Mesopotamia, religion was deeply intertwined with royal authority. Kings were often seen as chosen by the gods or even semi-divine themselves. Official cults regulated social life, and any deviation could be viewed as a threat to the social order. Though the official records seldom describe martyrs in the later sense, we have accounts of rebellious prophets or dream interpreters who were punished for challenging the established pantheon or the king's authority. Similarly, in ancient Egypt, the pharaoh embodied the divine principle on earth, overseeing the worship of a complex pantheon. When Pharaoh Akhenaten introduced a form of monotheism centered on the Aten sun disk around the 14th century BCE, followers of the old gods were sometimes forced to venerate the Aten alone. After Akhenaten's death, when traditional polytheism was restored, Atenist loyalists experienced persecution. These episodes, while not directly labeled martyrdom, set a precedent for later conflicts wherein religious loyalty could cost one's life. 2.2. The Maccabean Martyrs in Judaism. A more clearly defined notion of martyrdom emerges in Jewish history with the Maccabean Revolt, 2nd century BCE. Under the rule of the Seleucid Empire, particularly King Antiochus IV Epiphanes, a policy of enforced Hellenization placed Jewish practices under threat. Circumcision, dietary laws, and Sabbath observance were banned. A statue of Zeus was erected in the Jerusalem temple, sparking widespread outrage among devout Jews. The books of 1 and 2 Maccabees describe the revolt led by Judas Maccabeus and his brothers. These texts also recount the heroism of those who chose death rather than violate Jewish law. One of the most famous stories is that of the elderly scribe Eleazar, who was forced to eat pork in a public setting as a demonstration of his submission to the king's decrees. Eleazar refused, preferring death over violating Jewish dietary law, an act that would have publicly signaled apostasy. Despite the attempts of guards to persuade him to fake compliance, Eleazar remained steadfast, and he was executed. Another poignant tale is that of the mother and her 7 sons, often referred to as the woman with 7 sons. Each son, in turn, was tortured in an attempt to force them to eat forbidden meat or renounce the Jewish faith. All of them refused and were killed. Their mother, steadfast in her faith, urged them to endure suffering rather than abandon the laws of God. The courage displayed by these figures became a rallying point for generations of Jews facing persecution. Although the term martyr would gain its fullest significance in later Judeo-Christian contexts, the Maccabean stories solidified a theological framework that gave eternal meaning to this kind of suffering. The narratives emphasize fidelity to the covenant with God as more precious than life itself. Henceforth, many Jews would look to the Maccabean martyrs as exemplars, reinforcing an understanding that the righteous might die at the hands of oppressors, but would ultimately find vindication in the life to come or through the collective memory of their people. This understanding of faithful witness in the face of persecution set the stage for subsequent Jewish martyrdom accounts in Roman times, medieval Europe, and beyond. It also profoundly influenced early Christian notions of martyrdom. Indeed, the earliest Christians, many of them Jews or deeply connected to Jewish scripture, would look back on these stories as prototypes for their own struggles under Roman rule. Chapter 2. The Early Christian Era. 3.1. Under Roman rule, persecution and public spectacle. In the centuries immediately following the life and teachings of Jesus of Nazareth, the Roman Empire held sway over much of the Mediterranean world and beyond. Early Christianity was an emerging movement that faced both misunderstanding from the public and suspicion from imperial authorities. Initially, Roman toleration extended to various forms of religious practice, so long as participants also paid homage to the official pantheon and the emperor. Christians, who steadfastly refused to worship the emperor as a god, were perceived as subversive. The situation for Christians varied over time. Occasionally, persecutions were localized or triggered by specific events, like scapegoating Christians for a disaster, as Emperor Nero is alleged to have done following the Great Fire of Rome in 64 CE. At other times, particularly in the mid-3 RD century under Emperor Decius or in the early 4th century under Diocletian, persecution became empire-wide. Public trials were staged, where Christians were told to burn incense before a statue of the emperor. Those who refused faced imprisonment, torture, or execution, often by gruesome methods such as crucifixion, burning, or being thrown to wild beasts in public arenas. 3.2 Martyrs of the 1st through 3rd centuries CE. Among the earliest known Christian martyrs is St. Stephen, whose story appears in the New Testament's Book of Acts. Stephen was accused of blasphemy by Jewish authorities in Jerusalem and after a public hearing was stoned to death. The account of Stephen's final moments, praying for his persecutors, deeply influenced subsequent Christian views on martyrdom, emphasizing forgiveness and faith in the face of death. Soon thereafter, the role of martyrs expanded. Many communities across the empire had their local heroes. One of the most iconic stories is that of Polycarp, Bishop of Smyrna. Arrested around 155 CE, he was asked to renounce Christ. According to tradition, Polycarp famously replied, "For 86 years I have served him, and he has done me no wrong. How can I blaspheme my king who saved me?" He was burned at the stake, though legend says the flames arched around him, leaving his body unharmed, until he was ultimately pierced with a spear. Equally famous are the stories of Perpetua and Felicitas, two young women martyred in Carthage in the early 3rd century. Perpetua, a noblewoman, and Felicitas, her slave, were arrested alongside other catechumens, converts under instruction. While in prison, Perpetua kept a diary, one of the earliest extant writings by a Christian woman. Despite the pleas of her father, Perpetua refused to recant her faith. She and Felicitas were eventually thrown to wild beasts in the public arena. Their courage and serene acceptance of their fate became legendary, encouraging many early Christians to hold fast in persecution. These stories, and many others like them, were compiled and circulated as acts of the martyrs. The narratives reinforced communal identity, inspiring believers to stand firm against imperial demands. Annual commemorations were established on the anniversaries of martyrs' deaths, often at their burial sites. Over time, these anniversaries became the feast days of the saints, a practice that would deeply shape Christian liturgical life. 3.3 The Shifts under Constantine. The year 313 CE marked a turning point with the Edict of Milan, issued by Emperor Constantine and his co-emperor Licinius. This edict effectively legalized Christianity, granting freedom of worship within the empire. In subsequent decades, Constantine would show favoritism toward the Christian Church, financing the construction of basilicas and bestowing privileges on the clergy. While pockets of persecution occasionally flared up, the systematic oppression of Christians largely ceased. However, this shift did not spell the end of Christian martyrdom. In fact, new forms of martyrdom emerged, what scholars sometimes call white martyrdom. With no immediate prospect of persecution, zealous Christians sought other ways to demonstrate radical faith, such as withdrawing into the deserts of Egypt and Syria to live as hermits or monks. Though these men and women were not killed, many of them saw their austere asceticism as a spiritual martyrdom. Outside the Roman Empire's borders, Christian communities still faced persecution. For example, in the Sasanian Empire of Persia, Christians were occasionally targeted, particularly when tensions between Rome and Persia ran high. This laid the groundwork for further stories of martyrdom in the East, including among the Church of the East in Mesopotamia and beyond. Thus, within just 3 centuries of its founding, Christianity had developed a robust tradition of martyr narratives, stories that underscored faithfulness, moral courage, and the hope of resurrection. This tradition would continue to evolve even as Christianity moved from a persecuted minority to a faith of empire. Chapter 3. From the Roman Empire to Medieval Christendom. 4.1 Post-Constantinian Christianity and different forms of persecution. After Constantine's conversion and the subsequent Christianization of the Roman Empire, the dynamics of martyrdom changed dramatically in regions under imperial control. Where once Christians were the persecuted minority, in many areas they became aligned with the seat of power. Over time, Christianity would be declared the official religion of the empire under Emperor Theodosius I, and other forms of worship would be discouraged or outright suppressed. This new reality presented complex questions about persecution and martyrdom. Some Christians found themselves victimized by doctrinal disputes within the church. Heresy was increasingly criminalized, and dissenting groups, Arians, Donatists, Nestorians, Monophysites, and others, could face oppression from the official imperial church. While these dissidents considered themselves faithful Christians, loyal to what they believed was the true teaching, the imperial church deemed them heretics. Some of these groups preserved accounts of their own martyrs, highlighting the complexity of labeling in a newly Christian empire. 4.2 Martyrdom Beyond the Empire. Coptic and other Eastern traditions. A prime example of how martyrdom persisted outside the direct influence of imperial orthodoxy can be seen in the Coptic Church of Egypt. After the Council of Chalcedon, 451 CE, the Copts found themselves in theological conflict with the Byzantine Empire, which considered them monophysites, though they would say miaphysite to stress a nuanced Christological position. When Byzantine emperors tried to enforce Chalcedonian doctrine, Coptic monks and bishops were sometimes persecuted or exiled. In later centuries, after the Arab conquest of Egypt, new challenges emerged. Despite these trials, the Coptic community cherished a rich memory of earlier martyrs. Throughout the centuries, wave after wave of difficulties, whether from Byzantine rulers attempting to assert theological uniformity or from later Islamic authorities, cemented the Copts' collective identity. Churches dedicated to martyrs like St. Mark, considered the founder of the Coptic Church, stood as beacons of communal memory, reminding believers of the sacrifices made in defense of their faith. In regions like Armenia and Georgia, which had embraced Christianity in the 4th century, rulers and ordinary believers alike faced threats from neighboring powers, particularly Zoroastrian Persia. Armenian historians recount multiple episodes where Christian nobles and commoners were given a stark choice between embracing Zoroastrianism or facing death. The collective memory of these events, woven into the fabric of Armenian identity, underscored how martyrdom was not just an individual phenomenon, but a communal experience. Chapter 4. Islamic Perspectives on Martyrdom. 5.1. Martyrdom in the Quran and Hadith. In Islam, the concept of martyrdom, shahada, occupies a central revered place. The Arabic term shahid means witness, mirroring the Greek martyrs. A shahid is generally understood as one who dies in the path of God, although the specifics of how that path is defined have varied across Islamic history and jurisprudence. The Quran praises those who fight in the way of Allah, Quran 3:169, and promises them eternal bliss. Hadith traditions also elevate the status of the martyr, describing how they are forgiven of sins, spared the torment of the grave, and guaranteed entry into paradise. Importantly, early Islamic sources differentiate between various forms of martyrdom. While classical jurists often emphasized dying in a defensive struggle against aggression as the archetypal form of martyrdom, other forms, such as a person who perishes in a fire, under a collapsed building, or from plague, could also be recognized with a degree of martyr's reward. This broader application underscores that Islamic teachings on martyrdom are multifaceted, not limited to warfare alone. 5.2. The early Islamic community, martyrs in the first centuries of Islam. During the lifetime of the Prophet Muhammad, Muslims endured persecution in Mecca before their migration to Medina. Early converts such as Sumayya bint Khayyat are revered as the first martyrs in Islam. Sumayya, a slave, was tortured by her master for accepting Muhammad's message. She refused to abandon Islam and was killed with a spear. Her steadfastness became a powerful example for subsequent generations, symbolizing the willingness to hold firm despite social and familial pressure. Following the establishment of the first Muslim community in Medina, battles like Badr, Uhud, and the Trench produced individuals who were considered martyrs for having died defending the nascent Muslim polity. Their stories are embedded within the early Sirah, biographical literature, and Hadith collections, extolling qualities such as courage, selflessness, and devotion to God. 5.3. The story of Hussein at Karbala. One of the most pivotal events in Islamic history that shaped the notion of martyrdom, especially within Shia Islam, is the martyrdom of Hussein ibn Ali at Karbala in 680 CE. Hussein was the grandson of the Prophet Muhammad, and his refusal to pledge allegiance to the Umayyad Caliph Yazid led to a small band of Hussein's followers facing Yazid's forces near the Euphrates River in Iraq. Hussein and his companions were vastly outnumbered. After being denied water and subjected to days of siege, they were finally attacked on the day of Ashura, the 10th of Muharram. Hussein, his family members, and loyal supporters were killed. The tragedy of Karbala became the defining moment for Shia identity, symbolizing the struggle against injustice and tyranny. Each year during Muharram, Shia communities around the world commemorate Hussein's martyrdom with processions, public mourning, and passion plays that retell the events of Karbala. The theological reverence for Hussein's act of sacrificial defiance serves as the emotional and spiritual core of Shia piety, emphasizing that the martyr's blood is never shed in vain. Beyond Shia Islam, many Sunni Muslims also hold deep respect for Hussein's sacrifice, though it does not serve as the same central theological or communal marker. Nonetheless, Karbala remains one of the most potent symbols of martyrdom in the entire Islamic tradition, resonating far beyond any single community or century. Chapter 5: Jewish Martyrdom Across the Centuries. 6.1 Roman Persecutions and the Rabbi Akiva Tradition. After the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE, Jewish communities spread throughout the Roman Empire. Sporadic persecutions continued, particularly during times of turmoil. One of the most revered figures in Jewish tradition from this era is Rabbi Akiva, who supported the Bar Kokhba revolt, 132-136 CE, against Roman rule. According to rabbinic accounts, Rabbi Akiva's death was both a punishment for rebellion and a religious persecution. He was reportedly combed with iron combs, an excruciating torture, because he continued to publicly teach Torah despite Roman bans. His final words, recorded in the Talmud, were the Shema, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one," uttered as his soul departed. Akiva's fate cemented his status as a prime example of Jewish martyrdom, portraying unwavering devotion to Torah even in the face of death. 6.2 Medieval Pogroms and the Crusader Era. In medieval Europe, Jews faced repeated waves of violence from both popular mobs and official edicts. During the First Crusade, 1096, Crusaders heading to the Holy Land unleashed atrocities against Jewish communities in the Rhineland, in modern-day Germany. The Chronicles of Solomon Bar Simpson and other sources describe how entire Jewish families, besieged in their towns, chose to die by their own hands rather than be forcibly baptized or slaughtered. These tragic mass suicides, such as in Mainz and Worms, became haunting testaments to Jewish martyrdom. The medieval Hebrew chronicles evoke the Maccabean spirit, as individuals recited final prayers before taking their lives, or those of their loved ones, to avoid forced conversion. While the rabbinic tradition generally condemns suicide, these extreme acts were interpreted by many medieval Jews as a form of sanctification of God's name, Kiddush Hashem. The memory of these events shaped Ashkenazi Jewish identity for generations, embedding the martyr ideal deep in communal consciousness. 6.3 Modern-era martyrdom. From the 19th century into the 20th, the notion of Jewish martyrdom faced new contexts. Pogroms in the Russian Empire terrorized Jewish communities, leading some to see those killed or maimed for their faith as modern-day martyrs. The Holocaust, 1933-1945, introduced an industrial-scale genocide that decimated Europe's Jewish population. Although martyr is not always the term used, many prefer the Hebrew word shoah, catastrophe, to stress the uniqueness of the event, Countless individuals died because of their Jewish identity and their unwillingness or inability to hide it. Figures like Rabbi Kalonymus Kalman Shapira of the Warsaw Ghetto, who continued to teach and offer spiritual solace until deportation, are sometimes venerated in a martyrological light, demonstrating the tenacity of faith under unimaginable horror. Chapter 6. Sikh Martyrdom in South Asia. 7.1 Guru Arjan, Guru Tegh Bahadur, and the foundation of Sikh identity. Sikhism, founded in the Punjab region of South Asia in the 15th century by Guru Nanak, would eventually develop a profound understanding of martyrdom. Though the Gurus preached a message of devotion to the one God, equality and service, they encountered hostility from ruling authorities. Guru Arjan, the fifth Sikh Guru, oversaw the construction of the Harmandir Sahib, Golden Temple, in Amritsar and compiled the Adi Granth, the central scripture of Sikhism. Under the Mughal Emperor Jahangir, Guru Arjan was accused of supporting the emperor's rebellious son. He was imprisoned and tortured, ultimately dying in custody in 1606. Many Sikhs view his death not as a political punishment, but as a direct result of religious intolerance. The event made Guru Arjan the first Sikh martyr, setting a precedent for the ideal of sacrificing one's life, but never one's principles or faith. Later, the ninth Guru, Guru Tegh Bahadur, was executed in 1675 under the Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb. The Guru had stepped forward to defend Kashmiri Pandits, Hindu Brahmins, who faced forced conversion to Islam. Guru Tegh Bahadur's refusal to convert led to his public beheading in Delhi. This act of martyrdom further ingrained in Sikh tradition the imperative to stand for religious freedom, not just for Sikhs, but for all. 7.2 The Evolving Legacy of Sikh Martyrs. The sacrifices of Guru Arjan and Guru Tegh Bahadur paved the way for the transformation of the Sikh community into the Khalsa under the 10th Guru, Guru Gobind Singh. The martial dimension of Sikh identity was solidified, emphasizing the duty to defend the oppressed. Over the centuries, numerous Sikhs have died in battles defending the community against various aggressors. Martyrdom remains a highly revered concept within Sikhism, symbolized by the Panj Pyare, the first 5 initiated Sikhs, who offered their heads to Guru Gobind Singh in a legendary test of devotion. In the 18th century, Sikh communities faced significant persecution from Mughal governors and Afghan invaders. Stories of Sikh men, women, and even children who chose death over renouncing their faith abound in Sikh oral and written history. The term Shaheed, martyr, attaches to these figures, whose shrines dot the Punjab landscape. Even in contemporary contexts, the remembrance of these martyrs shapes Sikh cultural and religious identity, reminding believers of their historic struggles and duties in standing up to injustice. Chapter 7. Hindu Martyrs and Conflicts of Faith. 8.1 Medieval India. Encounters with invading powers. Hinduism, a vast and diverse religious tradition, has not always emphasized the concept of martyrdom in the same manner as some other faiths. However, instances of religiously motivated persecution or conflict do appear in Indian history. During medieval periods, when various Islamic dynasties ruled parts of the Indian subcontinent, Hindu rulers and devotees sometimes faced forced conversions, destruction of temples, or restrictions on worship. Rajput warriors in regions like Rajasthan are often celebrated for their defense of Hindu kingdoms against invading armies. While many of these conflicts were also about political power and territory, some Rajput chronicles frame the deaths of warriors as sacrifices to protect the Dharma, making them martyrs in the folk memory. Women who committed jauhar, ritual mass immolation, during sieges, preferring death to the dishonor they believed would follow conquest, are likewise venerated in local law, although the term martyr may not be used in the classical sense. 8.2 Cases of martyrdom during colonial and post-colonial periods. During the British colonial era, religious tensions mingled with anti-colonial sentiment. Social reformers, freedom fighters, and everyday devotees sometimes faced imprisonment or death for challenging British policies perceived as violating Hindu customs or spirituality. Figures like Tantia Tope, Rani Lakshmibai of Jhansi, and others are often remembered as national heroes more than specifically religious martyrs, but their devotion to protecting their people and faith resonates with certain interpretations of martyrdom. In modern India, violent communal episodes, such as riots between different religious communities, have occasionally produced individuals hailed as martyrs by their respective groups. The narrative of these events can be deeply contested, reflecting the complexity of religious identity and nationalism in the subcontinent. Nevertheless, the stories of those who died defending temples or attempting to shield vulnerable communities from mob violence often enter local or communal mythologies, reinforcing the notion that death for one's dharma remains an act of ultimate devotion. Chapter 8. Buddhist Martyrdom in History. 9.1 Early Buddhist Context and the Concept of Self-Sacrifice. Buddhism, founded by Siddhartha Gautama in the 6th century BCE, places great emphasis on non-violence, compassion, and the pursuit of enlightenment. Martyrdom is not as centrally institutionalized within Buddhism as in some other religions, largely due to Buddhism's aversion to violence and its emphasis on the cessation of suffering. However, certain stories within the Buddhist canon, such as the Jataka tales, which recount past lives of the Buddha, include acts of self-sacrifice, though these are not framed as martyrdom in the sense of dying at the hands of persecutors. Instead, they illustrate the bodhisattva ideal of giving oneself selflessly for others. 9.2 Persecutions in China, Japan, and Vietnam. Buddhists have at times faced persecution from political authorities. In China, Emperor Wuzong of the Tang dynasty, 9th century, initiated a crackdown on Buddhism, motivated by economic concerns, the wealth of monasteries, an ideological preference for Confucianism and Taoism. Monasteries were destroyed, monks and nuns were defrocked, and images of the Buddha were seized. While widespread executions of Buddhist monastics were not the primary method, many Buddhists who resisted faced punishments. Those who lost their lives or refused to abandon monastic vows despite imperial decrees could be considered martyrs, though the historical sources do not always employ that terminology. In Japan, during the Sengoku and Edo periods, various Buddhist sects found themselves entangled in feudal power struggles. Some sectarian conflicts led to armed uprisings, such as the Iko-Iki, composed of militant followers of the Jodo Shinshu tradition. Those who died in battle for their Buddhist community might be venerated as martyrs by later adherents, though this mingles martial valor with religious devotion. Vietnam, especially in the 20th century, gave rise to iconic images of Buddhist self-immolation as a form of protest, particularly against the Catholic-dominated government of President Ngo Dinh Diem in the early 1960s. Thich Quang Duc's self-immolation in 1963 captured global attention. Although this is typically described as a self-sacrifice or an act of protest rather than martyrdom in the classical sense, it shares many parallels: willingness to die for a religious or moral cause, readiness to suffer for the welfare of others, and deep conviction in the face of oppression. 9.3 Modern Buddhist Martyrs. In more recent decades, cases of violent persecution against Buddhists have emerged in conflict zones. Under the Khmer Rouge regime in Cambodia, 1975-1979, religion of all forms was severely repressed. Monks were defrocked, temples were desecrated, and thousands were killed or starved in forced labor camps. Many Cambodians see the monks and laity who perished specifically for maintaining or defending Buddhist traditions as martyrs. The global Buddhist community often memorializes their loss alongside the broader genocide, underscoring the extreme conditions under which religious life was extinguished. Chapter 9. Bahá'í Martyrs in Persia and Beyond. 10.1 The Bab and the Early Babi Martyrs. The Bahá'í faith, a relatively young religion emerging in the mid-19th century, has perhaps one of the most documented modern histories of martyrdom. The precursor to the Bahá'í faith was the Babi movement, founded by the Bab, Sayyid Ali Muhammad, in 1844 in Persia, modern-day Iran. The Bab's teachings heralded the imminent appearance of Him whom God shall make manifest, later recognized by Baha'is as Baha'u'llah. The radical nature of the Bab's proclamation, challenging clerical authority and introducing new religious laws, incited fierce opposition from the Persian establishment, both secular and religious. Many Babis were arrested, tortured, and executed for refusing to recant their new faith. The Bab himself was executed by firing squad in Tabriz in 1850. Eyewitness accounts recount how the first volley of shots failed to kill the Bab, which was interpreted by followers as a sign of divine intervention, further galvanizing their resolve. 10.2 19th Century Persecutions in Qajar, Persia. In the years following the Bab's death, persecution intensified. Some Babis, galvanized by the martyrdoms, attempted violent resistance, though these attempts were short-lived and led to harsher retributions. With the emergence of Baha'u'llah as the central figure of the Bahá'í faith, many Babis embraced this new revelation and became Baha'is. Yet persecution continued in Qajar, Persia, with local authorities often instigating mob attacks on Baha'is. Some of the most harrowing accounts involve Baha'is being cut to pieces, burned alive, or forced to renounce their faith under the threat of torture. The Babi and Bahá'í martyrs collectively number in the thousands during this period, forming a bedrock of historical memory that shapes the Bahá'í community's identity. 10.3 Ongoing challenges for Baha'is. Even in the 20th and 21st centuries, Baha'is in Iran continue to face systematic discrimination, barring them from higher education, confiscating property, and imprisoning leaders on spurious charges. While overt executions have lessened, the Bahá'í community still regards those who have died or been killed because of their faith as martyrs in a modern sense. The resolute commitment to non-violence that characterizes Bahá'í teachings underscores the moral courage of individuals who endure such oppression without retaliation. Their plight has drawn international attention, prompting calls for human rights protections. Chapter 10. Other traditions, other martyrs. 11.1 Mormon martyrs in early American history. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, often referred to as the LDS Church or Mormon Church, was founded in the early 19th century in the United States by Joseph Smith. From the outset, this fledgling religious movement faced hostility and suspicion. The murder of Joseph Smith and his brother Hiram by a mob at Carthage jail in 1844 is considered a martyrdom by Latter-day Saints. The Smiths had surrendered themselves to face charges, but were attacked by vigilantes. Their deaths cemented their status as martyr prophets in the eyes of their followers. Subsequent persecutions forced the Mormons to undertake a mass exodus to Utah under Brigham Young's leadership. Along the way, believers faced hardships, vigilante violence, and the elements, with many perishing in the process. While these deaths are not always classified strictly as martyrdoms, they are woven into the broader narrative of a people who suffered for their religious convictions. 11.2 Yazidi and Zoroastrian cases. The Yazidis, an ethno-religious group primarily located in northern Iraq, have historically been subjected to repeated campaigns of extermination by various rulers who misunderstood or demonized their distinctive beliefs. In recent history, the self-proclaimed Islamic State, ISIS, in 2014 brutally targeted Yazidis, killing thousands, enslaving women, and displacing the community from their ancestral lands in Sinjar. Those who died for refusing to convert to the extremists' interpretation of Islam can be viewed as modern Yazidi martyrs. Their plight garnered international attention, highlighting a stark contemporary example of religious genocide. Zoroastrians, once the dominant religious group in the Persian Empire, became a minority following the Islamic conquest of Persia in the 7th century. Over the centuries, many converted to Islam to avoid paying extra taxes or facing discrimination, but some who refused conversion were killed. While Zoroastrian texts do not always employ the terminology of martyrdom, the community preserves stories of men and women who died rather than forsake their faith. Today, Zoroastrians remain a small but resilient community, with a vivid historical consciousness of those who sacrificed everything to maintain their beliefs. 11.3 Indigenous faith martyrs. Across the globe, countless indigenous communities have been subject to colonization, forced conversion, and cultural assimilation. In the Americas, Africa, Australia, and Asia, indigenous spiritual leaders were often targeted by colonial authorities or missionary groups. Some were executed for resisting conversions or for continuing their traditional rites. While these individuals are not always termed martyrs in Western academic discourse, their communities frequently honor them as sacred ancestors who died defending the cultural and spiritual heritage of their people. Chapter 11. Martyrdom in Modern Conflicts. 12.1 World Wars, Civil Wars, and Religious Persecution. The 20th century witnessed the largest-scale conflicts in human history, including 2 world wars and numerous civil wars. Religious communities found themselves under siege in various contexts. Under Nazi Germany, Jewish people were systematically murdered in the Holocaust, which is often described in theological or communal terms that resonate with the concept of martyrdom, although the scale and method of annihilation present unique complexities. Other groups, Jehovah's Witnesses for instance, were also persecuted by the Nazi regime for refusing to support or serve in the military of the Third Reich, leading to executions that the witnesses themselves regard as martyrdoms for their faith. In the Soviet Union, after the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917, religious believers of all stripes, Orthodox Christians, Muslims, Jews, Buddhists, were systematically oppressed by an officially atheistic government. Clergy were imprisoned, killed, or sent to labor camps. Orthodox Christians still revere the new martyrs and confessors of Russia, while members of other faiths similarly honor those who persisted in worship despite the threat of gulag or death. 12.2 The 20th Century and New Forms of Martyrdom. The 20th century also ushered in new forms of activism, sometimes framed in religious language. In Latin America, Catholic clergy who championed the poor in the face of oppressive regimes were assassinated or disappeared. Figures such as Archbishop Oscar Romero of El Salvador, killed while celebrating Mass in 1980, are widely regarded as modern Catholic martyrs. Romero spoke out against government-backed death squads and deep social injustices, epitomizing a martyr's willingness to die for the cause of faith and justice. In the United States, Christian civil rights leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. were assassinated in the midst of social transformations. While King's sainthood is informal and not recognized in a traditional sense by a single church, many Christians consider him a martyr in that he died for advocating the gospel-based principle of racial equality. 12.3 Contemporary Martyrs and Global Awareness. In recent decades, religious persecution persists in various parts of the world. Minorities such as Christians in parts of the Middle East, Muslims in certain Buddhist-majority countries, Rohingya Muslims in Myanmar, Ahmadi Muslims and Shia Muslims in certain Sunni-majority areas, or Hindus and Sikhs in regions of hostility, all have experienced targeted violence. International organizations, including human rights groups, have begun to track these cases more systematically, raising global awareness of persecution and martyrdom in real time. Some of these modern martyrs become known worldwide, like Shahbaz Bhatti, a Pakistani Christian minister assassinated in 2011 for advocating reforms to blasphemy laws. Others remain nameless individuals in remote villages or war-torn areas. With the rise of digital technology, stories of their sacrifices can spread more quickly than ever before, shaping global discourse on religious freedom and human rights. Chapter 12. Martyrdom, Memory and Legacy. 13.1 The Power of Memorialization. Religious martyrdom leaves an indelible mark not just on the victim but on the collective consciousness of the community. Shrines, reliquaries, memorial days, liturgies, poems and songs all ensure that the martyr's sacrifice is never forgotten. In Christianity, the veneration of saints and the pilgrimage to their relics has been an essential aspect of popular piety for centuries. In Shia Islam, the annual commemoration of Ashura immerses believers in the tragic memory of Karbala, binding them together across time and space. In Sikhism, the memory of Guru Arjan and Guru Tegh Bahadur is invoked daily in Ardas, the Sikh prayer, reinforcing solidarity and resilience. This memorial process can unify a religious community, providing a sense of shared history and purpose. Martyrs are often idealized as paragons of virtue, moral courage, and unwavering faith, setting a standard for believers to emulate. Yet memorialization can also entrench divisions. The memory of martyrdom sometimes fuels resentment or hostility against perceived oppressors, leading to cycles of violence and retribution that extend the tragic legacy of the original event. 13.2 Martyrdom in Interfaith Dialogue. Amid a world that remains pluralistic, the narrative of martyrdom can become a double-edged sword. On one hand, the act of bearing witness through martyrdom points to universal themes: courage, integrity, devotion, capable of eliciting empathy across religious divides. People from disparate faiths may see in each other's martyr stories a common humanity and longing for spiritual truth. On the other hand, martyrdom narratives can also erect barriers if they perpetuate simplistic notions of good versus evil, or us versus them. When communities fail to engage critically with their own traditions, they may neglect the context in which martyrdom occurred: political intrigue, social strife, or cultural misunderstandings. In an age of globalization, interfaith dialogue must tread carefully, acknowledging both the deep reverence religious groups hold for their martyrs and the ways these legacies have been manipulated to incite hatred. 13.3 Martyrdom and the Future of Religious Identity. As we move deeper into the 21st century, questions of religious freedom, state neutrality, and minority rights will continue to shape how martyrdom is remembered and narrated. Advances in technology and communication make it harder for repressive regimes to hide their persecution. At the same time, extremist groups may exploit modern media to glamorize violence under the banner of martyrdom, muddying the lines between selfless witness and acts of terror. Religious communities have the opportunity to reaffirm the core virtues that genuine martyrs embody: empathy, moral conviction, and a willingness to suffer rather than cause suffering. By uplifting stories of nonviolent resistance and spotlighting the complex humanity of those who died for their faith, believers can resist facile interpretations that reduce martyrdom to a tool of propaganda. Ultimately, martyrdom remains an intensely powerful concept that transcends time, place, and religious boundaries. Its essence, giving one's life for a transcendent truth, touches a chord in the human psyche, reflecting our innate capacity for self-sacrifice. Whether revered as saints, heroes, or ordinary people of extraordinary courage, martyrs remind us that faith can run deeper than fear, compelling individuals to stand firmly on the bedrock of belief, even when all else trembles. Conclusion: Enduring lessons of sacrifice and faith. From the stony hills of ancient Judea, where the Maccabean martyrs refused to compromise their covenant, to the Roman arenas where Christians like Polycarp and Perpetua stood firm in the face of roaring lions, to the dusty plains of Karbala, where Hussein's small band displayed unshakable resolve, the thread of martyrdom weaves through centuries of human history. It stretches across geographies and religions: Jewish, Christian, Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, Sikh, Bahá'í, and beyond, uniting them in a singular testimony that faith can inspire extraordinary acts of courage. We have seen how martyrdom can galvanize communities, forging and reinforcing collective identities. We have also witnessed how the memory of martyrdom can sow seeds of future conflict, especially when it is weaponized to perpetuate hatred. The legacy of martyrdom is thus ambivalent, capable of nurturing the noblest virtues of empathy and self-sacrifice, and equally capable of fueling the darkest impulses of vengeance and fanaticism. Still, at its most profound level, martyrdom is about witness. The men and women who have gone to their deaths for their faith have, in doing so, borne testimony to the depth of human conviction. They serve as reminders that, even in the face of overwhelming power, the spirit can remain unconquered. Whether couched in language of Kiddush Hashem, sanctification of God's name, bearing the cross, or chanting the name of God, these martyrs challenge us to consider our own boundaries. For what would we be willing to sacrifice everything? In an era of global interconnection, the stories of religious martyrdom can engender mutual respect or deepen rifts, depending on how they are told and received. Understanding the historical context, acknowledging the social, political, and cultural forces that shaped each episode is crucial. Only with nuanced knowledge can we honor the genuine sacrifice of the past without letting it become a stumbling block to peace in the present. Despite the tragedies that litter the pages of this history, there is hope in the fact that most religious traditions also champion compassion, forgiveness, and reconciliation. Perhaps that is the most enduring lesson of martyrdom, that while we revere those who died for their faith, we must strive to create a world in which no one has to. Through dialogue, respect for diversity, and a commitment to justice, we can hope to shape a future where the ultimate sacrifice becomes ever less necessary, and where the witness of the martyrs is honored not by repeating cycles of violence, but by upholding the dignity and freedom for which they died.